Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our third webinar in this series on raising awareness to grooming. Today's session is about how to facilitate a grooming awareness activity. It is the third webinar in our series with the ecumenical partnership between Catholic Professional Standards Ltd and the National Council of Churches in Australia. With us today, we have Laura Cregan, the National Coordinator of the Safe Church Program.
Hi.
And Sue Crittall, who is a social worker and a professional supervisor.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi again, Sue. And the bulk of today's session will be going through a presentation Sue delivered on the grooming awareness activity, which we'll provide links to. This, as I mentioned, this webinar is the third in the series. It's part of this ecumenical partnership. So we do have a range of denominations and faith communities with us, so welcome. This topic, as with all that we've done in this series, may raise some feelings or emotions for you all, so be mindful of that. We do have some links to support networks and those providers out there that if you are in any way moved by this, or would seek to talk to someone, I encourage you to do so, and we'll provide those links. But we'll get started. Before I do go into the content, just a reminder that there are some functions in the webinar platform that you may be familiar with, but for those who are new to the webinar experience, you can chat to us or everybody by the chat button on the right-hand side. If you want to have a private message to either of us, you send a message to admin. Throughout the session, there will be some questions asked of you. It's called, they label them as polls. So it's a sense to get a feeling of how you are going and feeling about the content and also the topic in general. We have a couple of offers, which are links to external websites that we want to make available to you, particularly how to access the grooming awareness activity that Sue is talking through today, and a few other things. And we do have a couple of documents that we'll make available to you throughout the day as well. So if there is anything that you want to ask, double check on, please do so in the chat. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and waters of the country I'm on now, the Latchula people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present and young leaders of today and the future. I also acknowledge and pay respect to any Aboriginal people who may be present with us today. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians and elders past and present of the land and waters of the country wherever you may be linking in from. CPSL and the NCCA are committed to the ongoing work of reconciliation with our Aboriginal families and communities.
We acknowledge the lifelong trauma of abuse victims, survivors and their families, the failure of churches in Australia to protect, believe and respond justly to children and vulnerable adults, and the consequent breaches of trust in the community. So for this morning, we've got a prayer here for you. We're not going to read it out loud. It's just something for you to reflect upon. So we'll just give you a minute. Maybe you just want to, take a moment to center yourself. We've been rushing around and trying to link in. So maybe we'll just give you a minute to either say a silent prayer or just center yourself. Amen.
Thanks, Laura. Just again to, reiterate, the purpose of today is to provide you all with an introductory understanding of how to deliver a grooming awareness activity and provide a specific resource designed for faith communities to help you to do that. We're aiming to build capacity to implement strategies to interrupt grooming, raise awareness about what to do if you suspect grooming, and be empowered to facilitate the grooming awareness activity in your own faith community. Just to be mindful that some of the topics may be confronting when we're talking about grooming and sexual abuse of children within our faith communities. So you may find it difficult, unsettling, challenging, confronting, or distressing. Be mindful with your own feelings, how the content is affecting you. If you are affected, may trigger some memories. Remind you to follow up with some support and ensure that you are taking your own self-care seriously. This is an important conversation to have. I mentioned it in the last webinar. Robert Fitzgerald, one of the commissioners in the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse, said it best when he said, child sexual abuse thrives in an environment where there is secrecy. The perpetrator requires it, and the vulnerabilities of children and young people are enhanced by the secrecy of it. How do you break that down? By having conversations, bringing things into the light, and having a normal conversation about sex and sexual abuse. This is what we are doing today.
So we just encourage you to be aware of your own story, and just to build on what Daniel said, from our experience, every time we run this activity, it does generate conversation, but we have also had quite a number of people who have come and made disclosures or shared their own story after they have participated or observed this activity. So please know your own story and please take that on board, and we'll have support at the end of the webinar for you.
Now we have a great video that Bravehearts have allowed us to show you all in our training. This video can be viewed on the Bravehearts website. What I am going to make available to you is a link to the Bravehearts training page. They have some fantastic resources and training around grooming, raising awareness to child sexual abuse, and capacity building activities centered around this topic. So I encourage you to have a look. If you want to click on that link, that'll open their page. But we just wanted to say thank you to Bravehearts for allowing us to play this video. It's a great introductory and provides some good content on grooming, and it will set the scene for us to look at the grooming awareness activity. So we're just going to disappear for a moment, and I'll play the video.
In approximately 70 to 90% of cases, children are sexually harmed by someone they know, are close to, trust, or even love. Most cases of child sexual assault are planned, and the process by which a person prepares a child, significant adults, and the environment for the abuse is known as grooming. To protect children from sexual assault, it is vital that we understand grooming characteristics. Grooming is used by an offender to set up a situation that increases opportunities to sexually abuse the child. The offender aims to gain access to the child, obtain their compliance, and above all, ensure the child maintains secrecy and silence. Over short or long periods of time, offenders will not only groom the child, but will often groom the parents, caregivers, and other family members as well. They may also manipulate the child's physical environment to gain access to them. Understanding what motivates child sexual offenders helps us protect children. Two broad categories to help us understand why people offend against children are known as situational and preferential offending, and these apply to both male and female offenders. Research tells us that an offender's motivation may change between the two categories from time to time. Situational offending is considered to be motivated by needs such as power, control, and aggression, and is opportunistic in nature, whereas preferential offending is about a true sexual preference for children. Those who sit predominantly within the preferential category are more likely to groom a child and typically meet the criteria of pedophilia. Preferential offenders are also more likely to abuse multiple children, often multiple times. Offenders aim to have access to the child and ensure secrecy and silence. Therefore, children who are less likely to tell, communicate clearly, or be believed are at greater risk. Some children may be at increased risk due to special needs, difficulties in communication, their very young age, living in out-of-home care situations, or a lack of understanding in respect to their body and sex or sexuality. Having an awareness of the signs of grooming and factors that increase a child's vulnerability can lead to prevention. It is also vital that you establish safe, open environments to prevent abuse and make grooming easier to identify. Remember, a child may tell you about sexual assault verbally or through behaviour. If a child does tell you they've been harmed or are at risk of harm, you must believe them. Recognising and responding to child sexual assault appropriately can prevent harm or minimise the impact of harm and help ensure the child's well-being and safety.
Thank you again to Brave Hearts for letting us play that video.
So in a minute, we're going to go to the video of Sue presenting the Grooming Awareness Activity. So the video footage was recorded at our Safer Churches conference, the NCCA Safer Churches conference in Brisbane last year, whereby Sue was invited to run the Grooming Awareness Activity as an elective. So you will see that it's live footage, and we've got people in the room at the conference, and after the actual activity there are people asking questions. So we'll leave those in there, and then we'll go to the live Q&A after the video footage. So the activity developed by Sue that you're about to see has been designed for use with churches, church leaders and church members. It focuses on the grooming context in the church, including congregations and faith communities and church-related activities and events. The reason we invited Sue to come and present this at the conference was because we'd seen this activity and it had been brought to our attention, and we decided that we would integrate it into our Safe Church Awareness workshops with the National Council of Churches, and that was done about 12 to 18 months ago. So this is actually integrated into our training. So on the webinar today, we've got people that are already running this activity, and we've got people that are new to the activity. So for the purposes of the Q&A at the end, we will have Sue responding to questions from Daniel and I, and we will have Kylie Kendall, who is one of our our NCCA trainers who has been out implementing this activity for 12 months. So we've got two people answering questions at the end, but over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, Laura. I've just put a poll out. I'm also going to make available a link to you all that will take you to the page to be able to access this activity. I'll do this again at the end, and it's also included in your resource sheet. We'll disappear now and we'll play the video. We are online. Beauty of this, similar with the first webinar, is to have Sue, who's delivering this session live, and both Laura and I live, that we can respond, as well as Kylie in the background, to any questions that come up. So feel free to put some questions in the chat to us, and we'll disappear now and play the video.
We'll start now. So just to remind you that we are recording this. It'll be utilised for other training purposes other than today. So I'm delighted that you've all attended this workshop elective. My name's Sue Crittall, and I developed this grooming awareness activity, which you will see in bits and pieces in front of you on the table, which we're going to explore in a minute, and hopefully to explain to you how the resource emerged and how it might be utilised in the context of your organisations. I'm mindful as we start of much that's been going on today, so I'm sure we've all got a lot of thoughts and feelings that we've been going through that we bring into this workshop. I also recognise that there are people in the room here who have an enormous experience in the world of training around child sexual awareness. So hands up who are trainers in this room. That's terrific. So you'll all have a lot of experience that you bring into the collective wisdom that we gather to look at. The resource that you have in front of you is something that we're going to explore. It's clearly about grooming, and I'm conscious, as we all are, when we commence any training in this topic, that it's a subject that can raise issues for us. We're reminded of that through the conference today, and it's another reminder today. And certainly when I've utilised this activity, it's raised issues for people. So as trainers, as well as our own experience that we bring into it. You're going to see here that I have a PowerPoint up here. The Grooming Awareness Activity comes in a little box, looks like that, and it has a number of parts to it, and one of those is this PowerPoint slide presentation that's here. There's a lot that comes through this activity that echoes much of what we've heard today. So the Grooming Awareness Activity itself consists of, apart from the box that holds it all together, it consists of a facilitator's guide, of which you have one on the table. It consists of a number of sets of cards that are all colour-coded, and I've rubber banded them for you at the moment. It also consists of this PowerPoint, that there is a link to the PowerPoint that you can utilise, as well as participant notes that are also on the table in front of you. I'm going to do one of the cardinal sins of PowerPoint work, and that is scroll down through about 6 slides that we're not going to focus on, but that's because it's an activity within itself of which we're not going to run through all of it today. So bear with me when I do that scrolling down. I'd like to share with you what the purpose of the activity is. And the purpose of it is as a training tool to raise awareness in relation to grooming, stages of grooming, the progression of grooming, and that grooming can be interrupted. That's one of the significant aspects of this training tool. And it's designed to be, has 2 real purposes. One, it can be used as a standalone training resource. So it's designed as a 2-hour training resource. If you were going to do it just on its own, the PowerPoint's there, you'll follow through. But, and perhaps more importantly, especially for all of you gathered here, if you have existing training mechanisms within your own organisations, this can actually be used as, guesstimate, a 10 to 15 minute interactive resource used that can complement your existing training. That's why it was designed. But it recognises that for some they may prefer to do it as the full one. How was it developed? It was developed through a process of consultation. I have involvement with the Uniting Church through a few different spaces, though I'm not employed by the Uniting Church except when I do consultancy work. I work primarily as a professional supervisor with clergy and community development workers. And through my work with the Uniting Church, I recognised through my involvement in their Royal Commission task group that there was this real area that congregations needed to learn more about in the area of grooming. And it was looking to find something that would assist congregations, churches, church organisations to understand the grooming of adults, children, communities, congregations, colleagues, parents, caregivers. So it's designed to cover all of that. That's how it was done. And during the time of its development, when it was cross-checked with people and through research literature around grooming, I also had the opportunity to be the church community member on the Queensland Synod's interim redress scheme. So every time I heard a survivor's story, I would cross-check and say, can I see you in these grooming cards? So it got designed and redesigned around all of that. It's important to call it an activity as opposed to a game, because grooming's not a game. So I keep focusing on the fact that it is an activity. So it's an interactive training resource, and it works from the work of Wellner and the 6 stages of grooming. So what I'm going to do is say to you, if you were a trainer utilising this resource, here's something that you could do. You could spread the cards out on the table like I have done, and what I've done here is that I've rubber banded them in colour, so they're all colour coded. You can pick them up and have a look at them. And what there is there's one set of cards that's got Wellna's 6 stages of grooming on it. And there's one set that's got a yellow sticky note. Just don't move the yellow sticky note because we're all going to be together. So there's one set of cards that's got Wellna's 6 stages of grooming. So I told you I'd be doing this. Apologies. So the 6 stages of grooming as identified by Wellna. And then the other cards are examples of grooming behaviour. The design of this activity is so that people step out what the 6 stages of grooming are. So those cards are numbered. So have you got the 6 stages of grooming cards? And put them out in a row so you can layer other cards below them. So they're a different colour. They look exactly like what's on the board here. Have we all got the 6 stages of grooming? Got 6 stages of grooming? You haven't got them? That's it, you picked it up? They look exactly like these. So can you spread them out in a row so that you can build under them? So targeting a person, gaining trust, filling a need, isolation, sexualising the relationship, and maintaining control. Now, Wellna in his work talks about targeting the victim, but I actually went to a Blue Knot training session, and as I was engaging in this Blue Knot training session, I determined I didn't want to have targeting the victim as the first card. I wanted targeting the person. I felt that was more just something that resonated for me, and I can see some head nods that resonates for others. And targeting the person, because that targeted person could be the colleague who's groomed to allow other grooming to occur. So that's the 6 cards that are there. So this activity is really very simple. So you layer the 6 cards out and you check that you've read them and they're in order, 1 to 6. And then what you would do is you would take one set of cards and have a look at how those cards fit in relation to the headings. So on your tables, everyone has a set of cards that has a yellow sticky note on it. That's it, yellow sticky note. So if you get that set of cards, that's a set of cards in relation to who can be touched. So what you're going to find is you're going to find that within that set of yellow cards, there's 6 cards. So the task of the activity is to put those cards in relation to the headings. So which of those cards is targeting the person? Which of those cards is gaining trust? Which is filling a need? Which is isolation? Which is sexualising the relationship? And which is maintaining control? So you're actually putting them in a line to show the progression of behaviour. Is the instruction clear? So I'm just going to leave you to put them in a line to identify together which one demonstrates the progression of grooming behaviour in relation to who can be touched. So how are you all going? So it's 1 for each. So I'll give you a clue. The first one's going to be who can be touched. And the second one would be tickling, wrestling and hand holding. Did people identify as tickling, wrestling and hand holding would be about the gaining trust one, the first progression of behaviour? The next progression of behaviour is the card that says non-sexual touch, back rubs, sit on a lap and stroking. So we're demonstrating how behaviour is progressing. The next card, isolation, is accidental touch of private parts. So the behaviour has progressed from non-sexual touch to the accidental touch of private parts. And then the next card in your row should be take explicit photographs, sexual touching and sexual acts. And the last card, which is the maintaining control, is blame, shame, threaten, intimidate, and say to the TP, targeted person, no one will believe you and you agreed. On the cards is the language TP, targeted person, and G for groomer. And when you have, as you progress through this activity, the targeted person's usually in italics to identify the targeted person's speech. So the idea of this is if you're working with a group who are seeking to grow an understanding of grooming, that you've got a very simple card-based interactive table group activity whereby you can assist people through this to understand the subtlety of grooming, to understand how grooming progresses, to recognise when they look at the content of these cards that they can see how different behaviour just subtly moves the groomer along their progression of activity. My experience of utilising this activity is in ethics training, where it's used as a resource tool with clergy. There's a set of cards here in relation to online grooming. So if you were working with a group of young people in the context of a school, you could utilise that set of cards as a way of raising awareness. They're designed so you can use them with parents, with caregivers and with colleagues. So the next encouragement as a facilitator would be to say to your group, get another set of cards, whichever one you choose to, and then layer it underneath. And we're not going to do all of this by virtue of time, but this is how it can look, that you then layer underneath the next set. So as a group, choose a next set of cards and together determine what the progression is that set of cards is displaying. So some of you have discovered that I put on the table an extract from the facilitator notes. So the facilitator book that you have in front of you has got what I like to call the facilitator's cheat sheet, because I might have written this, but I don't always get the sequence right. So if you have a look in your facilitator's cheat sheet and determine which was the set of cards you picked up, and then have a discussion of how did we go at putting those in relation to wellness stages of grooming headings. There's 2 sets of the facilitator's notes on each table. Does any group need more time to check that? So the changes between are subtle. You might be there, I don't think that quite fits there, it's a bit tricky. It's not designed to trick people, it's not designed to do anything other than stimulate conversation. And as a trainer, you'd be getting people to discuss what is on those cards, to discuss whether or not there were other examples that they would have in relation to that particular topic. So it's designed as an interactive piece rather than a standalone, let's look at this. The next part of this activity, and Laura, I'll just ask you to hand something out. The next part of this activity then, if you were a trainer, and clearly you could do all of those, but usually time is at press and you can't. So I'd be there, which is going to be the most appropriate set of topics to then have within the training that you're doing. Then what you invite people to do is we're exploring the fact that grooming can be interrupted. And that early interruption impacts the progression of grooming behaviour. That echoes what we've had the presenters talking about today. So what you've now received on your table, so as a trainer I'd hold this back at the beginning and then share it on. What you've now received, and they're numbered on the back, is a set of 6 interrupter cards, and they're clearly designed in the shape of a stop sign. And what you then encourage people to do is layer those stop signs underneath the headings, so 1 to 6. So which is the first, which is the second, and that's why you've got to pull the cards so you can layer under them. And you then invite your participants to layer those cards then under their sequence. So it looks like that. So you've got the stages of grooming heading, you've got whichever examples of grooming behaviour you have selected to get your participants to do, and then you've now layered the interruption cards underneath at the bottom. They're numbered on the back. They're numbered on the back. So they are numbered on the back. They do change. So I'd encourage your participants to read out what's on those stop signs, because what you're wanting to encourage them to do is to recognise what there are different interruptions that occur, and the task becomes to recognise that as behaviour progresses, the interruptions change. So the first one is a card about that our congregation, our church, our organisation, our school has policies, procedures in place, has a culture of shared guardianship, is looking after children and vulnerable adults. So that's the first card. The last card is we're calling the police. The last card is I believe you, thank you for telling me I'm calling the police. So the interruptions change. So everyone's had a look at the interruptions? Echoing one of the presenters that just was previously, the second card is, I don't mean to offend you, but we don't do that here. And it's giving people the language. I road tested this in some congregations, and I said, what language would help you to be able to say to someone that you've been to church with for 20 years That's not okay. What's language that you would feel okay to say to somebody this is the first time they've visited the church? So that's how it's designed. The last part of this activity, and of course there's discussion the whole way along, is to invite the participants to separate between rows 2 and rows 3. So you're doing a physical separation between rows 1 and 2, which is, and then rows 3, 4, 5 and 6. And what, as a trainer, you encourage people to do is to recognise how interruptions change between 2 and 3, and that interrupting grooming reduces the risk, we hope it prevents, reduces the risk of progressing to sexualised behaviour. Because by that second card, we're tickling, we're doing things like that. But we haven't given pornography, we haven't taken explicit photographs, we haven't been sexting. It's to interrupt. So that's how the activity works. It's designed to be, as I say, it's really quite simple, but it's involving and interactive. If I was a trainer and had lots of time, I wouldn't colour sort the cards, because that's a team building activity to colour sort the cards. If I was a trainer, I would be making a decision, do I walk around and help the tables to put them in sequence, or do I do a photocopy of the facilitator's cheat sheet? We're all adults in the context of training here, and I think having the facilitator cheat sheets a really good idea. One of the things that I've discovered in running this as a training tool is it has raised for people, I didn't recognise that as grooming. And it has its subtleness and its simplicity has actually enabled people to make connections that they hadn't made. So that's the grooming awareness activity that I designed. So look forward to having a chat. Yep. We can have some questions or discussions about that. I could make extra comments in terms of cultural sensitivity. If you were doing this in particular cultures, you wouldn't have men and women in the same room necessarily, unless the elders were okay about that. If you were doing this with young people, you would have different supports in place. But you're all trainers. You understand the importance of context and the importance of ensuring that you utilise a training tool in an appropriate way for the people with whom you're engaging. So Laura has the microphone here if there were any questions about the activity, or you might like to have a chat. There are a couple of questions, Laura. I hope I can answer them.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question about the activity, but between 1 and 2, is there a sort of intermediate stage where people are just being nice to each other? And you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing wrong with being nice and friendly to people, and perhaps even shaking their hand, maybe even putting a side hug around them in appropriate ways and so on. So it seems to jump from 1 to 2,
sure,
with nothing in between.
It jumps from 2 to 3, jumps to 2.
Even 1 till 2.
I guess look, thank you for that question. And my response is this is a grooming awareness activity training. That it's not there, that's what it's designed to do. It's not there to talk about how we celebrate within community. The PowerPoint and what you would then side pack it with as a trainer is that we all know that behaviour may or may not be grooming. What we're seeking to do is to grow people's understanding of what grooming is. So the question that you raise within a table group discussion would be a wonderful thing to have a conversation about of, hang on a minute, you know, I like to give somebody a hug. I might have a warm side embrace, or culturally we'll give someone a kiss on both cheeks. Now suddenly you're telling me I'm a groomer. That's precisely what we're talking about. And the PowerPoint that comes with us uses language such as church people like to be nice. They don't like to say, hang on, let's not do that. They're in an environment where they are willing to forgive, like the theological language previously. And this is a part of a tool of saying some behaviour is just not okay. We all need to be alert to that.
Sue Ash from Baptist in WA. We've increasingly been trying to raise with our church leaderships that it's possible for whole church systems or church leadership groups to be groomed.
Yes.
And I haven't read this properly, but I'm wondering if you could make some comments about how you're thinking about that and how we might be able to use this or something similar for bringing that level of awareness to the systems as well.
Thank you. I agree with you that whole congregations get groomed. I'm well aware of that. One of the set of cards here talks specifically in relation to congregations and how congregations might see something. So there is a set of cards that picks up on that, and it picks up on the fact that, and it comes back into the warm side embrace, it comes back into that the cultural things that we do in church, praying together, closing our eyes, holding our hands, allowing people to have huddles of activity, they're all places that those that have the intention to groom, comes back to situation, opportunity, vulnerability, those that have the intention to abuse and exploit that, the church is ripe for that. How as a congregation we raise people's awareness and their astuteness to what's going on, what might be going on, and to question. Yeah.
Thank you. I was just going to ask, just with some of the language that's been used on the red cards, where have you drawn that knowledge base from in relation to, saying things like, I need help, I need to talk, or where the interruption strategies have come from?
I guess from that, thank you for the question. I guess from a lot of different spaces, and for some in particular, it's in relation to situations that I've observed in congregations where grooming has taken place and where you're there asking the question, what happened, why didn't people interrupt this? And so it's emerged out of that. Is it the only language you could use? No. And if I was a trainer, I'd be there. What other things would you add to that? And hopefully people don't get lost in, I don't quite agree with that language, but if they do, that's great because it's generating discussion. Yeah.
If you run the whole thing with all of the cards, how long does it take?
Well, I designed it if you wanted it to be a 2-hour thing. That's a really fat framework to give lots of time for discussion, but I would be suggesting that you could do it in under that. I mean, not a lot of times we don't have a 2-hour thing set aside. So if you're asking me how exactly it would go, well, if you colour sorted the cards, you save time. If you spread the headings out first, you save time. So there's lots of ways that you could pick it in. But I would think to go through the whole activity plus discussion, I would think an hour at least. Yeah. And it does, as I say, it has the PowerPoint to go with it.
I've got a question, Sue.
Laura.
Because we've integrated into our Safe Church Awareness workshops and we do a modified version of it, so it's great to see the whole thing. Do you advise us to keep doing that even though it's a condensed version? Because when we have people in a workshop, they do get this along with a whole day's worth of content. So do you advise us to keep doing what we can in a condensed version of it, or do you think it's better to say this is available to congregations? It's an invitation to congregations to pick it up. We're just trialling it, that's the question. And it's like, should we continue to try and do a condensed version of it, or is it better just to completely take it out and have it as a separate resource for congregations to pick up?
Then let me ask the group who've had a conversation from the front today and not a lot of interactive activities, albeit we did a hand thing and we've had some music and etc. But you've had an opportunity here in what was probably about a 10-minute time frame to have a look at 6 headings and 2 layers and now a set of interruptions, say 15 at the most. Do you think that that's enough to assist the people that you would be working with in the context of training to get a start into this, to put it alongside other training? Then if they wanted to, you could do more work. Yeah. Yeah, so and thank you. That's what I think, Laura. I think that what you're actually doing is you've got an existing training framework and you're there. We need to break this up. Adults learn best when they're together. Adults learn best when their own knowledge is appreciated, and to have a chance to just do something that's visual and tactile, I think it interrupts training. So
I'd just like to add to that. In WA, in the Synod, Uniting Church Synod of WA, we've actually implemented this into our Safe Church Awareness training, and we can get through most of it in about 15-20 minutes.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
If we let the groups manage it pretty much themselves. You can guide them so far, and with discussion amongst the group. So it's kind of informal, but you can actually work through it quite quickly, or you can, we've tried just using one and 2.
Okay.
And then leaving the rest of it,
Yes.
or going so far down. There are different ways you can shorten it.
So that then, as a trainer, becomes why are we utilising the activity? What do we want our participants to get from this?
Yes, and it does break up a long day of listening, certainly, and they do appreciate. The participants do appreciate it.
Thank you for that. That's great feedback. Yeah.
Really simple question: how do you get hold of copies?
Oh, it's sold via Mediacom. So Mediacom Education and Publishing. So that's a publishing house. It's on the. I'll have to tell you. I hope it's on the facilitator's guide. Thank you. It's on the inside of the book. So it's from Mediacom. So Mediacom Education and Publishing is what you would Google, but it's like www. Not. Could you just tell us what the web address is? Okay, so you just go to Mediacom, and the /GAA is where you go to get the facilitator PowerPoint and the participants' notes. So in the pack itself, the PowerPoint's not in the pack, and the participants' notes are not in the pack. So you just, when you have a look in the front page, it tells you exactly where to go. You can download it. I do Code of Ethics training for the Uniting Church, and the Royal Commission identified that, as we would all know, that when institutions do training around their ethics and code of conduct, that they need to do reference to grooming awareness, reporting, etc. And so what I do is I take 2 or 3 slides out of this. I put where it's come from, so I'm honouring the process of that, and I then insert it into that training.
Hello.
Josh.
Thanks. I use this in a very different way. I use this with congregations where there's been identified a person of concern as a way to illustrate to congregations where we know there is a risk, the person's behaviour without making it too personal for them. So it's kind of, particularly when I work with congregations who are somewhat oppositional to having a person of concern agreement in their space. I use this a lot to sort of normalise the behaviour and saying that this is not acceptable. It's not about Johnny, it's about his behaviour, and this is a good way to make those links between him as a person of concern versus Johnny, the nice guy who comes to church.
Well, that's great to hear. Thanks, Josh. One of the ways that I've utilised it is because I do professional supervision with clergy, I've used it as a resource tool in the context of professional supervision in clergy, especially when I've been asked to do work with people who their offenders have been identified in their congregation, and assisting them to understanding how they've been groomed.
Sue, I just have a recommendation for it. I've used it with a number of congregations, particularly in isolated areas, and their feedback was that in the next publishing of this, can the colours be more differentiated.
Okay.
Because particularly if you're doing it of an evening,
Yes.
when the lighting's not so good, it's often difficult to pick the different colours. And
Thank-
so if you mess them up on the table, they're a bit lost.
Thank you for that. I'll give I didn't have any control over that, but I will feed that back in. What I wanted to do was avoid red and green because I didn't want to have red-green colourblind people going, what the heck, what am I doing? So, but I didn't actually ask for bolder colours, but I'll give them that feedback. Thank you so much.
I was just going to ask Sue, could you perhaps share one or two good news stories where this activity has meant that a groomer has been stopped and harm has been prevented?
In my own congregation, we had a person who arrived in, we'd never seen him before he arrived in the congregation, and was very willing to get to know people very fast, in this picture. And because it's the congregation that I attend, funnily enough, they get to participate in what you could only describe as sample testing. And they're very, very patient with me to go through. They've done Code of Ethics games for the Uniting Church as well as this one. And so we ran that. And the wording on the second card of "I don't mean to offend you" came from a colleague of a friend of mine who's in my own congregation, who went up to this man and said, "This is not okay, we don't behave." I mean, she felt sick, etc., but he never came back to the congregation. Well, that of course is one of the things, and that's why we're all vigilant. Yeah.
I thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you,
it's
sir.
a wonderful activity. I'm thinking that there are 4 levels of this activity may be done. Clergy level, Sunday school or youth group level, then there's the parents, there's also the children themselves. And teaching the children some behaviours will also open their own eyes. Meaning, if I was to give you a gift, and don't tell anyone, no, you tell mummy that this person gave me a gift. That way mummy said, "Why did he give you a gift?" "Mummy, I don't know why." So mummy, there is the indicators, the light bulb needs to open through. This activity, when I was looking carefully through, is actually, if we will say that, let us say that I'm naive, that's opened my eyes to some activities that may be happening, not knowing that if we are a congregation of loving people, as my brother Peter just said early on, we are loving people, this is what we do. But obviously, within a congregation, there may be one that may be grooming, not knowing that we are through. How can we introduce this activity without making alarm? Because I know what happens the moment a congregation knows that there is a person who is a predator and who has done wrong in society. What normally happens, congregation leaves the parish and finds another parish, so we lose our own parish. How can we do it, not subtly, but where we could do, just like the Safe Church program, we're introducing, and there's a long way. We've gone a small step, but that small step is actually a huge step for lots of a congregation. How can we do it without sort of making alarm bells, but we are actually educating at all levels? That way we realise that we are doing it the best for our children, all vulnerable people. I mean, I wonder now, there are many vulnerable people that happens, adults in particular, both men and women.
Yes.
So it's right across the board.
Yes.
Even I was surprised to saw that even grooming of clergy. I mean, for me now that's a worry. I mean, I have to evaluate my own eyes. Where I have to be careful that I'm not groomed by someone not knowing it is happening. Please, I would appreciate your answer.
Thank you for your question. My comment would be this, that in the context of other education, raising awareness that you would do within your community, within your church organisation, that may be something that's focused on small children or focused on adults. This then becomes a resource that you might be able to utilise in companion with that. So if you're looking at how do we raise awareness of our parents within our community about being conscious of what's happening for their children and how people are interacting, doing that in a way that's culturally sensitive to your context, and this may be because it's a tool that sits there that you didn't write, it can be a way of raising something that's almost easier than raising it yourself.
Okay, so we are going to take a short break now before we get Sue and Laura back and have a live Q&A to give you some time to think of any additional questions that you might ask now that you've seen an example of how to run the activity and some Q&A from the participants in the room. So it is 10:25. We'll come back and start the second component, our live Q&A, at 10:30. And feel free to respond to the polls or put any comments or chat questions that you might have to us while we're offline. But we'll see you back at 10:30 and start the second session of today's webinar. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We now have the opportunity to talk through the activity and some questions that people have sent in to us when we've canvassed leading up to the webinar series around the activity, and also if there is anything specific that you'd like to ask of Sue or even Kylie as a trainer and someone who's very experienced in delivering this type of activity, please do so via the chat. So I'm going to remove the slides so we become centre of screen as we have this conversation. Sue, I guess just off the bat, who's the driver?
Thanks, Daniel. I had involvement in some Royal Commission spaces, orientated spaces, through my involvement with the Uniting Church in Queensland and nationally. Prior to that, my work as a professional supervisor and facilitator of workshops had seen me working in spaces of helping people to understand being a safe church, healthy faith community life, and expectations of behaviour for ministers, for clergy. I had seen firsthand the damage that occurs in faith communities where there's been abuse perpetrated. I've seen the damage to individuals and their families and to the faith communities as a whole. And I'd seen congregations struggle with the knowledge that abuse had taken place. And I heard people say, how did we not know? What didn't we see? Because I've been a facilitator of training for many years, I've developed interactive training resources for the Uniting Church around their code of ethics and generic training resources around ethics and congregational life. And I know the impact as both a participant and a trainer of having training tools that are tactile, that are visual, that promote individual involvement and small group interaction and discussion. And I recognise the importance of adult learning, of learning principles as a trainer. I was conscious of the need to raise awareness within the context of faith communities because of what I'd seen and heard and been involved in about understanding grooming in churches. And it was reinforced for me as I heard resistance from people, and I suspect others have as well, that when new things were put in place around child safety, people would come to me, including in my congregation, and say, why is it necessary? We never did it when my kids were little, and flatly, I'm not going to do it. So I was aware of some of the training that was being developed in response to the Royal Commission by various denominations, and including training material around what grooming is. And I read as much of that as I could. And I realised it was all designed to inform people from the perspective of talking to people, of having a slide talking to people. So I felt there was a need for an interactive training resource that invited people into understanding grooming. And I thought that Wellna's 6 stages of grooming could help that. And I wanted a resource that didn't just name the stages, but empowered people to recognise grooming could be interrupted. And I wanted to use language that fitted faith community language, because a lot of the material that comes from the secular world, it's not language that you often hear in church world. Church world has its own language, as we all know. So I looked for and read story. I know this is a long explanation. I looked for and read story after story about how groomers had groomed in the context of faith communities. So I'm just rehashing what was a 2-year journey here, seeing how children have been groomed, parents, caregivers, and a recognition that people really struggle to understand a community as a whole have been groomed. So I wanted to encourage and equip. And the concept of cards and layering cards and developing stop signs and then separating them out, I had a concept of that as a visual activity, of having something down that you could hold and that you could shift and move. And I shared that concept with colleagues, and I did it with these little paper things of little words and what do you think and different colours, and I was given encouragement. And then over 2 years I road tested it. And I tested it with colleagues for their thoughts and for further examples. And I had colleagues who were working in their ministry context. And I said, can you take this back to your ministry context and see if this fits? And some of the language on the cards then got changed and altered in response to what they said, Sue, it needs to add this, or that's not quite clear. And then I pulled the facilitator material together so that you could either have it as a standalone activity, or you could have it as integrated, such as NCCA has done, as an integrated. So you pull a piece out of it rather than having to do the whole. So that's how I designed it.
Thank you, Sue. And Sue, just before I go on to the next question, thank you for creating an activity that is so understandable for people. It's a really excellent, practical, straightforward activity. So I guess the next question is, we've seen how you run it. What qualifications do you need, or skills to pick this up and go and run it in training or in your congregation? What kind of expertise or qualification do you need?
Thanks, Laura, and thank you for that affirmation. I'm a member of a congregation. I'm a committed member of the Uniting Church. I understand church land, and I want church land to be a safe place for people. So having been part of the suite of resources that people are developing and growing in this space, I'm really thankful to have been able to offer something in that resonates for people. In terms of qualifications, I'd prefer to use capacity. I think once we start talking about qualifications, people feel ill-equipped. Whereas if you recognise the need for capacity, and it fits in with some of the comments that have been in the chat bar, be familiar with the content of the activity and the process that it follows. So like you'd be using any training tool, you don't use any training tool sight unseen. This is the same. Understand the content, understand the flow, be familiar with its language. You really need to be competent about discussing grooming and grooming behaviour, and you need to feel okay when people question you about that. You need to understand the context of a faith community as a place where grooming can thrive. Know your own story so that when you're there as a trainer, you're able to manage yourself and manage others. Be aware of who's in the training, the requirements of the group, age, gender, culture. So these go into capacity as a trainer to train. Manage the involvement of participants and watch how it's being received. So if people are struggling with the content, or if they're struggling with emotions, then as a trainer, have the capacity to go and speak into that space, not leave it so your participants struggle and flounder. And as any trainer needs the capacity to enable people to learn and grow. And this just happens to be a tool around grooming.
Great.
Thank you.
Sue, I just wanted to let everyone know that as you were talking about the Royal Commission and the work on grooming, I've just made available, if anyone is interested, the Royal Commission research report on grooming. So I'll leave that open for a few minutes. So we've talked about how you developed the activity, what drove you, and who should run it or deliver it. So who should be participating in the activity?
People who are seeking to grow their awareness of grooming or have the task, responsibility, commitment to be enabling other people to grow their awareness of grooming. I'm noting Michael's comment up in that chat bar about what other resources like this are out there. There's lots of resources in the space now around raising awareness about the need to keep children safe. I posters that have been developed. I know there's lots of colouring books that are around. There's some story books. Lots of you as trainers would be sharing your resources, their video clips. This is just one of a suite that is on offer. So there's lots of other resources, and my encouragement would be network with your colleagues and discover them. So to go back to participating, people who you recognise need to be educated about grooming. So someone may not want to be growing their awareness, but you recognise they need to be educated because they're yet to discover that they are needing to grow in awareness. People who have responsibility for ensuring their communities are safe, especially for children and vulnerable adults. There are many contexts, both faith and non-faith. This is a resource that can be used in a non-faith context, but it is steered towards a faith context. That's the space that I wanted to develop it for. You could pull some of the language out. Non-faith context isn't going to want to talk about God. Faith context must talk about how people spiritually abuse using God. So participants be parents, caregivers, grandparents, the faith community members, clergy, religious, youth groups, playgroup leaders, youth group leaders. It's the breadth of participants is very broad.
Thank you. So I guess, Sue, you know, are there any other considerations? You've touched on quite a few there, like culture and, you know, context and language. Are there any other considerations people need to think through when delivering that activity?
Look, I think there's one extra one that hasn't been mentioned yet. So we've already talked about being familiar with the content and the flow. I've made just really brief mention there about culture. That's a very important point. If you're running this in a community where there's people of diverse cultural backgrounds, be respectful of whether this is done in gender groups, age groups. So that's something you need to talk to the leaders, the elders about. We've talked about recognising people will be impacted and being careful. Perhaps two other comments to this, that the cards have only got so much space. There's lots of other examples you could put, especially on the interrupter cards. So I'd be there having a think about what other thoughts you might add into that space, and also be inviting your participants, what else might you say? What else have you heard? So that it becomes something that you grow with rather than we've presented it and we move on. So that would be two comments that I would make, and be aware of yourself.
Thank you.
So we're focused on delivering the activity and who should do it. As far as those who are participating, what should you do as a facilitator if someone is emotionally moved or upset by the activity itself?
This question raises the importance of highlighting always being aware that people need to feel safe and to be safe. And yes, it's an activity that can trigger memories. It can lead people to seeing events in a different light. It can challenge understanding. Let me make two comments and then share two stories. The first is, as a presenter, stay calm. So if someone's having an emotional response in your training, stay calm, manage it, be present, be sensitive, respectful, and considerate. There's a reminder here that in training spaces, when we talk about these types of content, you really ought to have more than one trainer if you can. And the community that you're working with, it's a really good idea to have a safe person identified from amongst that community, so that if somebody in a group is feeling that they need to talk, then you've got someone who has that specific task. You're not drawing them away from anything else. They have that task. When someone's impacted by training, it's going to impact the other people around them. So you're not just aware of what's happening for that person, but be aware for what's happening to others. So what do you do if a participant's triggered or is emotionally impacted? You keep focused on awareness of what's happening to that person. You stay with the task. You're a trainer. That's what you're doing. You're still pushing through the training, but you do it in a way that's going to enable people to be safe. You don't want to be talking about safety and in an unsafe way. It sort of defeats the purpose of the training. Let me share two stories. I ran this activity as part of a one-on-one session with a colleague, a minister, who was dealing with a situation in their congregation where someone was facing police investigation on grooming. I checked with the colleague at the start of talking with them about talking about grooming, how they were about talking about abuse. I didn't know them, so I was really gently testing out in that space of their own experience, but I didn't push it because I was trying to be very careful and sensitive. And so we did the grooming awareness activity. So this is as a one-on-one. This is me just doing it with one person, not in a group. And during the session, the colleague became highly
We might just give Sue a moment for her internet to catch up. The joys of a live webinar. So just while Sue's internet is refreshing, I've posted in the chat a link to the presentation which we watched today. It is available on the NCCA website on their resources page. So if it is something that you want to rewatch or even share in your own faith communities, there's a link available there. I've also, so Sue's going to log back in, going to make available, we do have a resource sheet which has a lot of the links to everything that we've spoken about today, the MediaCom link, as well as all your relevant state and territory statutory bodies and key support services that are out there. I think additional, while Sue's getting herself together, I also wanted to make known, we last week we had a session on unwanted contact and online grooming, and it was done in partnership with the NCCA, but also we had the E-Safety Commissioner part of that session. And what they did, what we did talk about was an article which has been released recently, highlighting the issue of online abuse, grooming online and unwanted contact, with particularly focused at children, since COVID has commenced. And so I'm going to make that article available for you now in the link. And I might just take a moment, give you a chance to have a look at that, and I'll touch base with Sue and see if she's able to link back in again.
And for everyone that's online, Kylie is answering questions wonderfully there. But if you want to get in touch with Kylie or myself, as you can see, Kylie's responding to these questions. We've integrated this, and it's been trial and error into our workshops over about 12 to 18 months. So please feel free to get in touch with us. We can talk you through how this went, integrating it into a workshop in a revised format. But if you do purchase the activity from MediaCom, you'll see that it is actually it goes for 2 hours, about 2 hours if you do it from start to finish. So it's well worth contemplating if you want to run it with your church councils, your other groups that you might have around the church. So I saw in there someone saying, I was watching the video and I was finding it hard to grasp, in that format. Let me assure you, when we first came across the activity, Kylie, myself and another trainer sat down and we literally took a couple of hours and we laid it all out. We discussed it, we went through it, and it does make a lot more sense. But as we've just said, you wouldn't turn up to training and run it cold. Take the time, have a look at it, and think through it, because it is something that needs a lot of digesting. So while Daniel and Sue are working out the technical difficulties, we might go to the online chat. So Kylie's answering questions there. Daniel's just posted up the link to the Guardian article. We actually published this in our newsletter yesterday, our Safer Churches newsletter as well. So for those that are looking for the resource, Daniel's also posted up the MediaCom link, so you can go into MediaCom and touch base with them. And just one thing, we had a question around how many people would you recommend doing the activity? And in the training, we recommend no more than 10 people per group, just so that it gives people the time to lay it out, have a conversation, and but smaller is better. 6 to 10 would probably be ideal. Hi, Daniel.
So I've just spoken to Sue. She's had some internet dropout, as we're aware. She's unsure whether she'll be able to reconnect. We've pretty much come to the end of most of the questions anyway. I did want to highlight, and Kylie mentioned it in the chat too, as far as the cards and the activity mentioning online grooming. And we are aware in the current environment, particularly since the COVID-19 restrictions has started, this is a really current day pertinent issue for everybody, with homeschooling and particularly adults working from home and spending more time in the online environment. Some things that I wanted to highlight that came out of that article, which struck to both Laura and I as we reviewed it, were in 2019, the eSafety Commissioner reported that they had on average 670 reports of child sexual abuse material each month online. Now, since the COVID restrictions hit, so if we're thinking about March, when everything started to be of an impact, they noticed an increase of 27% in reports of child sexual abuse material and online grooming. In April, that jumped by 37%. So just in the most recent reports since COVID, there's been a significant increase. And this is not just something localized to Australia. Globally, this is a trend that's being seen. In the US, since pandemic restrictions were enforced, they've seen an increase of 106%. And some of the things in talking to the eSafety Commissioner, as far as the reasoning, is that there are more adults now spending more time online and more children who are online. And so this is something that is a real life issue. I think we have Sue back with us, which is fantastic. Sue, are you there? No, well, we'll see. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Welcome back, Sue.
Okay, so sorry. Will I just pick up where I was?
Well, we've only got 5 minutes left in our time.
All right. Sorry, everybody. Yeah.
No, that's okay. We just talked through that recent article and some of the significances of this topic as a general topic of grooming, particularly in the online content environment now with COVID.
Yeah.
So, Laura, did you have something that you wanted to ask?
We jumped around a few questions there, Sue. So I might just jump into, well, we've only got 5 minutes, it's a practical application question, and this is for people that might go and purchase it. So the colours of the tiles used, it's been said, are very alike. So I think you've had a question to MediaCom about this, and just to let people know, like if you get it and you're a little bit confused by the colours, you've addressed that.
Yeah. I have. Look, I'd make the comment here that that the colour, some of the colours are alike because they've used really light colours, but when you set them all out, you can distinguish them. So one of the things that I would do, and I do, is I rubber band the colours together, and it saves time as training. I know it's frustrating. I'll raise it again, but colour band them together is the best thing to do. So you're actually handing the participants a row, so they can't confuse the cards within that, because that's the group of cards. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sticky dots on, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. One of the comments that were sent in was, this is an equipping preventative strategy delivered in such a way to not only deliver information, but assist people to know what to do and what not to do in certain circumstances. Are you able to elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I think that one of the things that this activity seeks to do is dovetail with what the reporting requirements are within various denominations. So it's an equipping strategy to grow your awareness, to make you see behaviour in a different way, to question what's going on, and that's an equipping strategy. But make sure that when you're using this, you're of course integrating this with what the expectations are of the organisation that faith community is connected with.
There is a question that's come in from the chat around whether this is something that is specific to those who are in paid positions, and you know what the capacity is. I think, you know, I'm happy for you to comment, Sue. I think from my context, this is something that anybody could deliver, and it's not just for those who have are paid employees. We would expect, from the context of the Catholic Church in Australia, in my context, that there would be people with safeguarding roles. A lot of the entities have volunteer people in those roles across parishes, and even within Catholic entities that may not have the resources to employ people. So it is those people that we would expect would be best placed to deliver this for their context.
And I think that's how I've seen it used, and it's readily embraced. It's understand we're doing this together. This is not something that requires tertiary qualifications or any other set of qualifications. If you're there committed to working within the faith community space that you're in to grow awareness, have a go.
I think that links back to that comment about having the conversation.
Yeah.
And this is a tool, a great tool for the faith context to start that conversation.
Just one question before we wrap up, and it's come in, and I know we've got people online who are involved in children and family and youth ministries as well. What do you say to people who ask if the activity is only suitable for adults, or could it be run with an older youth group?
Absolutely, run it with an older youth group. I ran it in a congregation, and one of the women in that space came up to me at the end and said that her son had revealed to her that he was sexually abused as a 14-year-old by another member of the youth group, and that she dearly wished that such training had been available for them, so that he might have come forward earlier. It was 25 years in that space before he had said anything at home. So it's, but again, manage the context, know the age group. The online grooming set's really good because it resonates with what kids are doing. But it's, yes, run it with your youth group. We know that child-on-child grooming occurs, and this can then be a tool to help in that space too.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. I guess as we wrap up and we move to close, is there any parting comments that you'd like to give anybody who is considering using this activity or sees this as something that they'd want to try?
I'd just give you great encouragement. It's really simple. I know it might look complex, but it's really quite simple. There are 6 headings. There's 8 examples of behaviour. When I'm doing it, I never use all of the rows examples of behaviour. I just cherry pick which is going to be the most useful for this context, and make sure that that you've got enough time to talk about interruptions and that separation of cards out at the base, so people can see early interruption impacts the risk of sexual exploitation.
Great. Thanks, Sue.
Yeah. And, you know, for anyone that's listening, Sue's available, Daniel's available, I'm available, Kylie's available. So please don't feel like you're on your own if you are interested. And there are a few questions we got to around time and integrating it and all that kind of stuff. We can answer any of those questions after the webinar. Please reach out.
And the comment there of how young is too young to do this training, there's training in school contexts for quite young children around grooming and grooming awareness. So this then becomes, what do we do in our churches to educate our families, and what do we do within churches so that church is a safe place for kids? And again, there's lots of posters that have been done. So something around this that you then tailor it in. And in terms of multicultural, perhaps I ought to say that I road tested this with lots of culturally diverse groups. So it's something that resonates across culture, but is designed around church.
Great.
Excellent. So thanks, Sue.
Yep. Okay. So, you know, just as we close up, to let you know that grooming is a criminal offence, and the summary sheet that you'll receive has all the state-based legislation and regulatory bodies there for you to have a look at. So please go and have a look at it.
And again, just a reminder that if you suspect grooming is occurring, that there is 2 numbers up there. Now, if there's an emergency situation, you think a criminal offence is happening or a child is in immediate danger, always call 000. If you want to report something, 131 444 is the National Police Link number that will take you through to your relevant state or territory police service where you can make a report. I've also made available our evaluation and feedback for today's session. If you click on that, it'll open up a new window, and we really strongly encourage you to complete it. It'll only take a couple of minutes, but this is critical for us in knowing how this training is being delivered, whether it's meeting your needs, and how we can improve. So please complete that before you log off today.
Yep. And as we've said multiple times from the beginning, please just check in with yourself, see how you're travelling after the webinar. We've got some phone numbers for services there, but please, your self-care is really, really important, and just take a moment when you get off the webinar to check in with yourself and see how you're travelling.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you, Sue. I'm also going to, before we close, before I log off live, I'll put that link in the chat as well, so you can click on it if anyone is having trouble accessing the survey. But we will, once we have a chance to consolidate, send through some emails to you all with the resource sheet and the other components. So thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure doing this series with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been really, like, I'm just so glad. It's been such a great partnership, and thank you to Kylie as well, who's on. But it's been really great working with everyone across all of our communities.
Sue, thank you again.
Thank you.
And I'm sure, you know, I found the Q&A and the presentations refreshing again, and I'm sure that everyone out there has as well. So thank you. I'm going to leave it live for a few moments while I get that link, but I'll say goodbye to everybody. And
all right. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Thanks, and feel free to get in contact with us.